Good day, grade 7. This is your first geography lesson. First of all, we just quickly need to revise some of the work that we had already covered. The structure of the earth, as well as the first part of volcanoes. So I could please direct you to page 68 of your textbooks. We'll quickly have a look there. Here it shows us the different parts of the earth, the different layers of which it consists. We have the core, the mantle, and then the crust. As we know, the most important part of these layers are the crust for the main reason. The crust is where we as humans stay. So therefore it's interesting to know about the mantle and interesting to know about the core, but the most important part always will be the crust because that is where we live as humans. If we look at the next page, on page 69, there is a nice picture there of the world split up into different tectonic plates, right? Now these are the parts that the crust are made up of, and these are moving parts that all fit together to form the crust, these tectonic plates. Now why is this important? It's important because along the borders of these plates, which we call fault lines, there is where we find almost all of our seismic activity, which means earthquakes, as well as volcanic activity. So it's important for us to know about these fault lines because that's where we will find most of our volcanoes and earthquakes. Here you'll see on this map how the different tectonic plates are split up. There's larger ones and smaller ones. Most important thing for you to remember with this part of the work is we have something called tectonic plates. It's the part of the crust that moves, and the borders of them are called fault lines. Now, on page 70 here, we begin to describe the three different types of tectonic plate movement. Now, I already discussed this in class. This is extremely important. There's three ways that these plates can move, right? And it's actually quite simple if you think of it. They can move either towards each other, they can move either away from each other, or they can glide past each other. And those are the three types of tectonic plate movements. It's very important that you have a summary of these three types in your book like we did in class as well, and that you did activity 2 which follows on it to describe the different type of tectonic plates like we discussed in class as well. Remember, the one who move towards each other we call converge, and the possible result thereof will be mountains. All right, the one that moves away from each other we call that diverge, possible result being rift valleys. Remember, I showed you the example of the rift valley there on the map, the world map, where we call the Great African Rift Valley. And then the last one, which is kind of the most important one, is something we call transform. That is when the plates glide past each other. And the reason this is so important is because this might result in an earthquake. Okay, so three types of movements. Please remember those quite carefully, and please make sure that you do activity 2 as well in your textbooks, but we'll discuss that. Now on page 72, here, let's quickly have a look at volcanoes. Now, I already asked you to go through this work by yourselves at home. We'll just go through it again to make sure there's nothing too difficult here. As you can see on the map here on page 72, most of the Earth's volcanoes we find along these fault lines we just spoke about, right? So on the borders of the tectonic plates, there's where we find most, not all, but most of the volcanoes. Now, what is a volcano? It says here in your textbook, volcano is a mountain or hill that has an opening at the top. This opening we call a crater, through which lava, pieces of rock, ash, and gas erupt. Now, once again, it's important to know what we call the hole, as well as the definition of a volcano. The hole is not called a ring of death, like someone once told me. It is called a crater, right? As you can see in your textbook. Here they tell us a bit about where we find most of the volcanoes on Earth, different regions where we find them. Most important thing for you to know is that they are mainly found along the fault lines. And then the second spot is hotspots. Now, once again, this has got nothing to do with Wi-Fi, even though it sounds like that. The word hotspot basically means it's a place in the Earth's crust where the crust is thin, and therefore it's very simple for the lava and the magma to break through and therefore we might find volcanoes in these hotspots. If you have a look here on page 73, this part they discuss hotspots and the ring of fire. This is a very important page, right? The whole of page 73 you can mark as important. The ring of fire is the area where we find about 90% of the world's volcanoes and earthquakes are found along the ring of fire, right? Now, it's not really a ring, as you can see there. It is kind of circular, so therefore we call it the ring of fire, but it basically refers to this area over here that you can see on figure 21, and it is along the outside edges of the Pacific Ocean, and we find tectonic plates borders there with these fault lines. You can see you'll find the western coast of America, which have a lot of earthquakes as well. If you go back to the other way, Japan, a lot of all those South Pacific islands where we find all these earthquakes. All of these places are located along the edges of the ring of fire. So if you were asked in a test, where do we find most earthquakes and volcanoes on Earth? The answer will be the ring of fire, right? If you asked where do we also find volcanoes specifically, then it is hotspots. Hotspot is a place where the Earth's crust is thin, and therefore it is easy for the magma to break through. Now, what is the difference between lava and magma? There is no difference. Magma and lava both are molten rock, which means rocks and pieces of the earth that melted because of the heat down in the mantle. Remember, we discussed the heat in the mantle. So because of this heat, it melted. Now, it gets forced up through different pipes or vents because of the different pressures we have inside of the earth. And when they then come out of the crust, we then stop calling it magma and we start calling it lava. So basically it's the same thing. The only difference is lava, we know it's already on top of the crust, whereas with magma, we know it's still inside of the crust. If you turn to the next page here, on page 74, you will see there's a nice picture of a volcano. How exactly it looks if you were to cut it open. You'll see the crater there at the top at figure 22. That is where all the lava and the ash comes out. Then you get the vent or the pipe where the magma comes through, and at the bottom we have the magma chambers, right? That's where the magma gather before it then shoots up out of the volcano because of pressure, right? The variance of pressure between below and a bit higher up. Here you have two nice pictures there. If you have a look there on page 75, nice pictures there of two different types of volcanoes. Source 1 there is an extremely difficult name to pronounce, but I've been practicing for a couple of years, so I know it's called the Eyjafjallajökull volcano, which we find in Iceland, which is a very, very big volcano. In the year 2010, it erupted, and the whole of Europe couldn't fly for 5 months because of all the ash that was in the clouds. Now, if you were to look at a map, you'll see that Iceland is about 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers away from Europe. So the fact that this volcano, the eruption, had such an impact on a place that's 5,000 kilometers away just comes to show you the extreme power we have in volcanoes and why it is so interesting for us to study them, because it can have an impact on our daily lives. Luckily, we in South Africa, we aren't close to any volcanoes. We are actually quite lucky when it comes to most of these types of natural disasters, right? We don't have any tornadoes. We have very, very little earthquakes. We don't have any volcanoes. We don't have any hurricanes. So yes, basically, good job on being in South Africa, right? Best place to be. Okay, so that's all for this lesson now. The next one we will start discussing earthquakes a bit more, and then we'll get to the floods and the effects that these different types of disasters have on us and on our daily lives. Please go through the work like I assigned you. Please make sure to do the activities like I asked, and then we'll start with earthquakes in the next lesson. Thank you and enjoy.